Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia, a member congregation of the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion. And today we're going to be continuing through my mini-series on women in the church, where we're going through my book, The Role of Female Laity in the Church. And in my section on women preaching and teaching, I went on a tangent addressing some of the common argument put forth by the proponents of women's ordination. And so today we're going to be wrapping up the 5 arguments that I mentioned with the 5th argument, which is, what about 1 Corinthians 11 and women being said to pray and to prophesy? Now, we already kind of addressed the issue of women prophesying a few videos ago, but let's particularly look at the issue here with 1 Corinthians 11:5. Here it talks about women covering their heads when they pray and prophesy in the church setting. Now, some have argued that based on this scripture, women can prophesy and worship as long as they have their heads covered. Now, firstly, this passage is not necessarily restricted just to the worship setting, although the Book of Concord does say that the head coverings from St. Paul is referring to the worship setting, though Pastor Prebino in his paper, Women Pastors' Mistaken Appeal to Prophesying, argues that this is gone beyond just public worship and referring to women prophesying in any situation, so the issue of women prophetesses. But secondly, Paul does allow women to prophesy, but he doesn't allow them to speak with authority. So women can prophesy, they're just not allowed to get up and speak with authority in the church in the leading role in the church. Now, the biggest issue, though, that I'd like to put forth to those proponents of women's ordination is that if you really think that 1 Corinthians 11 is saying that women can be pastors because Paul says women can prophesy, I might point out that Paul says that women aren't to prophesy unless they've got their head covered. And so when you proponents of women's ordination start insisting on women covering their heads in church, then you can start trying to use this passage to argue for women's ordination. Because otherwise, you're being a bunch of hypocrites, saying that, oh, this passage says women can prophesy, but then ignoring the fact that Paul talks about women covering their heads. And so if you think that this passage somehow permits women to be pastors, note that it strictly forbids women from speaking in the church unless their heads are covered. So even if this passage did somehow support women's ordination, which I argue it does not, you can't have women pastors unless they're wearing head coverings. So for all those proponents of women pastors out there, go ahead and have your women pastors, but they all need to be wearing head coverings, and so do all the lay women in the church. So when you proponents of women's ordination start enforcing head coverings in the church, then I'll listen to your arguments for women's ordination. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.